Now I'd like to introduce you to today's speaker, Steve Jones with Dodge Data and Analytics. Steve has well over 25 years of experience in the design and construction industry. Today, Steve leads thought leadership initiatives for Dodge Data Analytics on the impact of AEC technologies and high performance in the construction industry. Steve speaks at dozens of global industry events annually. He's authored a series of smart market research reports that have been distributed to millions of people worldwide. These reports are frequently cited as authoritative references on their topics. Today, Steve is going to focus on reducing risk and optimizing performance in owner organizations. With that being said, I'll hand it over to Steve. Steve?
Great. Thanks a lot. And thanks everybody for tuning in today. As you heard, we're going to talk about some research that we've done with the folks at eBuilder to try and take a look at what it is that owners are doing internally in their own capital program departments that correlate to better performance on projects. So my own background, I was in architecture for almost 20 years as a principal with a big AE firm that's now part of Stantec. I then jumped over into technology and spent 3 years as a vice president with Primavera. That was a great experience for me to understand the whole global technology industry. And now I've been with Dodge Data and Analytics for 14 years. We used to be known as McGraw-Hill Construction. We owned ENR and Architectural Record and Dodge and Suites. We're a private company now, known as Dodge Data and Analytics, and I run our research group. So we look at what the emerging trends are all over the world, and we publish a series of free reports. And I would encourage you to go to this URL. Anytime that you're interested, you have the time to do it, go to the analytics store. These are all free. They were sponsored by folks like eBuilder who want to have us do some independent research, objective third-party research on what the trends are in our industry. And you'll see things about technology. You'll see things about sustainability. You'll see things about emerging practices and processes that are going on in the industry, because it's difficult to know when we're involved in projects, as I'm familiar with for 20 years, to kind of get your head up high enough to see all the trends, and that's what we're trying to do for you. And again, these are all free, so please download them, use them, share them as much as you want to. They're really a resource for you. So let me take you through the process that we went through to do this research that we're talking about today about owner organizations, and then we'll look a little bit at some of the project performance data we got back. We'll look at the practices and the impacts and some of the correlation factors, and I'll give you some summaries and share with you a little bit of another research report that we recently did, which we think relates to this. So we talked to 174 owner organizations. We did both folks in the infrastructure side as well as the building side, and among the building side, we talked to both public agencies and private building developers and owners and operators. We asked them about their project performance. In general, how are you guys doing in terms of cost on your projects? How are you doing in terms of schedule and compliance with schedule? And then how are you doing with maintaining the design intent quality through the design construction process before you actually get the final asset? Once we profiled that, then we went in a little bit deeper and said, tell us about how you actually run your organization in 3 major categories. How are you dealing with talent? What is your organizational culture like? And then how are you dealing with actually measuring performance on projects? Because the idea is to see whether or not we could correlate what some of the people who had better project performance were doing versus maybe what some of the people who were struggling more with project performance weren't doing, so that we could help point people towards the things which seem to correlate to better performance. Simply, which practices and policies correlate most frequently with better performance? Now, there are vertical editions of these, of the research that we conducted here that are available from eBuilder. I encourage you to take a look at these. You can look at just what the public infrastructure owners say. You can look at just what the education owners say, just what healthcare owners say, and then you can look at what all the buildings owners, which includes some retail and some other, commercial buildings in there. So any of these spaces that you operate in or interested in, please, again, these are free. Go to the eBuilder site, download these, extract whatever information and wisdom and best practices you can find in there for yourselves, share them with as many people as you can. The whole idea behind this is to try and do research, which is difficult for other folks to do. If we could pull this together and make it useful to you as a tool, that's really what we're all about doing. So let's look at the project performance piece. As I say, we asked first this 174 owners to tell us, how are you doing on budget? How you doing overall on schedule? How you doing on quality? And then we dug in a little deeper. We said, what do you think is behind driving your performance issues? And we'll show you some comparisons between those. So I'm not going to present all the data that's in these reports. That we don't really have the time for that today. So consider this like you're strapping yourself into the passenger seat here, and I'm going to drive you through the neighborhood and point out some of the key things. And so when you do get the reports, you'll be familiar with how they're organized and some of the key points already, but certainly there's a lot more interesting data in these reports themselves. So when we asked about projects that exceed budget, only 18% of those owners could say that they never have projects that exceed budget. All right, so this is a problem that most people face in the building side. Now, when we asked those who said, all right, I do have projects that exceed budget, we said, well, how frequently is this happening to you? And that's what you'll see in the bottom part of this chart. And so the charts like this are fairly frequent through these reports. You'll see the good news part is that about half the folks say, yes, it happens to me, but it's somewhat under control for me. It's really less than a quarter of my projects. But as you begin to move to the right, you'll still see there's a number of owners who it's happening to them up to half as many times on their projects, up to 3/4 of their projects. Some of them are even saying this, I'm exceeding budget on every single project I do. And on the infrastructure side, similar sort of a pattern, but even fewer infrastructure owners could claim that they have no projects that exceed budget. And frankly, quite a bit more are in that over 75 category. So clearly, controlling budget and coming in on what it is you said you do on day one, by the time the thing is done, keeping that budget is a challenge for everybody in the industry. And we took the same approach with schedule, and you'll see here a big difference again on in that yellow box there between the buildings and the infrastructure, and how many could claim that they never have a schedule problem. But when you look on the lower parts of these two charts and who it is who has the schedule problems and how frequently they occur, the patterns are somewhat more similar here on schedule. And then I always say about quality deficiencies. It was pretty much better news here that there doesn't seem to be a lot of dial down in terms of the final quality, but all of us who do projects, we know why that happens. The end users are very concerned about the quality of these projects. It's sacrosanct in many cases, especially with infrastructure. So what do you do to make sure you meet quality? You throw money or you throw time at it. And so all three of these things are related, but I think the better results that we're seeing here are being paid for in those first two. So you can see 41% said that they end up not having to say that they have quality deficiencies, but we believe that they're really throwing money or time at it. And with infrastructure, a quarter are able to say that. Then we dug into some of the factors. And what we've done for you here to try and make a lot of data somewhat simpler to digest is we've created a 1 to 10 index. And we've taken all the numbers that people gave us, the percentages, and we've broken them down into this 1 to 10 index. And the dark blue is the budget impact, the toxicity on budget. That middle kind of maroon color is the toxicity impact on schedule, and the orange is the negative impact on quality. And then we've compared here today for you all buildings versus infrastructure. In each of those four verticals, you'll see different kinds of comparisons that we thought were relevant more to those owners. But for today, we're going to compare buildings to infrastructure. So this really gets into the heart of the matter with your own department, right? It's, do you have the adequate competencies and talent to do project management on your teams? And to what degree is the lack of that creating problems? And these are big numbers, 10s as high as it gets. It's definitely having the most impact on the quality performance, but also pretty significant impact on budget and on schedule. Then we got into a very interesting area about how effective are you at integrating with your capital projects department with those stakeholders in your organization. Now, it's not a surprise to me, having done mostly buildings in my life, my career, that you're seeing bigger numbers on that building side than the infrastructure side. You just tend to have fewer external stakeholders that you have to deal with, but the department heads and the department chairs and the administrators and the occupants of the spaces that you're doing, all the groups that have a stake in it, have a say in it, are going to be using these buildings. The degree to which you can effectively integrate with them, as you'll see later, does have a pretty powerful correlation to better performance, right? And so we said, to what degree do you think that this is a problem? And you're seeing pretty big numbers here. That our lack of ability to really integrate effectively with stakeholders is definitely causing problems here. And we got into project controls. How good are you as an organization, all right, at implementing project controls? And again, these numbers are pretty big. On the infrastructure side, it didn't seem to have as much of a hit against budget, but it's above average, north of 5 on every other one. Then we said, all right, how about the way that you work with your third-party consultants? All right, and that didn't have quite as much of an impact on buildings as it relates to budget, but a little bit more in terms of schedule performance and quality performance. Hardly had any impact on the infrastructure folks reporting in terms of quality, but still relatively significant in terms of their ability to come in on budget and come in on a schedule. Then we asked about risk management, and this is a report which I will refer to at the end of our presentation today, that we recently put out. And again, it's a free report, and I encourage you to download it, about where we are as an industry in terms of managing risk. And that is what came up really strongly on the infrastructure side, is the lack of the ability to manage risk is really having a big impact. And that's where you really see it stand out strongly on cost, and then followed by schedule. So after we baselined where this group of owners is in terms of their project performance against budget, against schedule, against quality, what it is we think, what it is they're telling us about the deficiencies relating to those, now we looked at the side of saying, all right, let's look at how you're nurturing your talent. Let's look at your organizational culture. Let's look at how you're going about measuring project performance. Let's look at whether or not you're using some kind of project management information technology platform or system to help you. And then let's look more closely at that impact of stakeholder engagement and see if we can't correlate what the best performers are doing against the average of everybody, and then also look at what it is that the worst performers are doing. So let me talk a little bit about how we came up with this idea of the best performers and the worst performers. Among this 174 owners, it turns out that we could isolate a group of 28 of them, 16% of the total population, who at least a quarter of their projects are actually brought in ahead of schedule, and at least half of their projects were completed under budget, right? So these are your really star performers out of the group. This is who everybody else would like to emulate in terms of having those kinds of numbers on the board, right? So we took all of their responses in terms of what they do, how they run their capital projects departments, and those are what we're going to call, for the rest of this presentation here, our top performing owners. By chance, it happened, doesn't always work out this way, but it happened this way, that exactly 28 could also be considered to be the lowest performing. They're the ones who at least half of their projects are behind schedule, and 25% or more of their projects are over budget. And so that barbell, in this case, just happened to work out very well, that there were 28 at either end, the top performing and the lowest performing. So what you'll see here is we compare both of those in terms of their practices, and in some cases we'll compare it to the whole group. We also, in the buildings, found that there were pretty compelling differences between the public owners and the private owners. And so you'll see here on the following slides that we've done some differentiation between those, and certainly in the all buildings report and some of those more vertical reports, you'll see there's a lot more detail breaking out the differences between what it is the public owners, how they're performing and what they're doing, and what the private owners, how they're performing and what they're doing. So This next series of charts that you're going to see are all set up kind of along the same way here. What we'll show you is the dark blue is the percentage of the top performing organizations who say, in this instance, they can say they have clearly defined job roles in their organization. And then you compare that to the lowest performing organizations, right? And so this doesn't necessarily prove that doing that is going to definitely improve your performance, but we find that there's enough of a correlation here that that's pretty interesting, okay? Then we ask, do you have a formal training and development program? And again, although there's fewer on those top performing that do, boy, look at that delta. That would be an indicator that, again, that's a place, if you're going to pick something to focus on, you may get a performance lift out of doing that. And also, you can see here on the right-hand side, what we've done is when there are variances, like with the public building owners actually even higher at 81%, we're showing you what that whole slice looks like. The healthcare owners are all basically at the same level as those top performers, and the private building owners are pretty close to it, right? So you can see which of the subgroups are actually doing better on some of these things. Then, do you actually associate being proficient with technology formally with job performance evaluation? Because all of us know how much more important technology is to implementing projects today. And so the degree to which you can associate proficiency really with job evaluation is going to incent the folks in your staff to actually take this more seriously and become more proficient with it. And again, there's enough of a delta there between the high performers and low performers that it's interesting. And then you look at what the private building owners, they're all the way up at 54% as a whole group. And healthcare owners are 52%. So you can see these are really leaders in that area that are making that proficiency actually a part of the formal job evaluation. And then you can see on the lower side, actually, the public building owners are really quite low. They're actually, as a whole group of them, are lower than the lowest performers. Now you look at education owners here, public building owners, again, a little bit lower on having an effective employee onboarding program. Think about day one for a new employee. And do you have a plan in place where you're really bringing them in to reach optimum effectiveness as efficiently as you possibly can? And so you'll see here, the private building owners and the healthcare owners are above average in their commitment to doing that. And do you have an active and continuous recruitment program? Are you always hunting for good talent? Right now in this industry, everybody's busy, and we clearly have a war for talent going on. And so there is, it's not that widely practiced even among the top performers, but when you do look at the healthcare owners, just as a group themselves, all of them, that's relatively highly practiced by them. They're always looking for good talent, always looking to recruit good people. And unfortunately, you're seeing down there the education owners, really only 12% of them could even say that they have something like that. Now we get into the second set of questions we asked, the first one being about talent. This one's really about your culture. What is your organizational culture like? So the first thing we asked is, could you say that it's true that construction processes and how you communicate about your processes are standard, and are they consistent across all your projects, right? Pretty big delta between those top performers and those lower performers. And healthcare owners seem to be really committed as a whole group. 74% of them are highly committed to it. Then we said, could you say that it's true that there's a clear and a consistent communication of your vision and your purpose from the leadership? Again, a pretty big delta. 83% versus 73% there on the private building owners, all higher than average. Unfortunately, the public side not so strong in that. Are you highly innovative regarding how you use technology? Big delta here. And the healthcare owners as a whole class, even higher than the average among those top performers, right? So this is clearly a way people are differentiating themselves, and it's clearly correlating to stronger performance. And then what would you say about your culture of risk-taking? I mean, any of us can relate to the fact that if you're in a culture where risk-taking is not encouraged, you're not going to do it. and an awful lot of innovation does require risk, right? And so you do see a delta there between those top performers and the lowest performers. And healthcare owners as a class are even much higher than an average among the top performers. And so the last aspect that we looked at is, how do you go about measuring your project performance? You know, what's your level of commitment to it? And you can see here a pretty big delta between the top performers and the low performers in terms of how frequently they actually measure it. Do you frequently measure it? And healthcare owners are the leaders in that. That entire class, 74% said that they do it. And private building owners, even more so. So there's a lot here to say that that would be something that could definitely improve your performance if you were actively measuring it. And then secondly, of course, to that, do you actually have clear and consistent ways in which everybody knows project performance is going to be measured? A little bit less for both the numbers, but still a pretty good delta between the top and the low performers. But then, you know, you look at the private building owners. That's where they really took the lead here. 60% of them say they do it, which you can imagine that's more in keeping with how private companies go about doing most everything anyway. They're measuring a lot of things that way. But healthcare owners right behind them. You know, unfortunately, it sort of falls off with education, public building, and infrastructure. Now, this is a really interesting one here, where you see a very big delta. In terms of percentage points, this is huge. Do you actually have a program that incents employees? You tie actual employee incentives, and it doesn't have to be money, but it's some kind of recognition, some kind of public recognition of it. It doesn't always have to be money. It's often money, but can you tie this to project performance? And you can see this seems to have a pretty big correlation difference for performance here between the top and the lowest. You can see the healthcare and the private building owners more frequently doing it, not happening so much with infrastructure, public building, or education. But this is something I would encourage you to really think about doing, because at the end of the day, folks, this is a people business. And the degree to which you can really incent your employees, have them understand what it is that they'll be measured on, not only the project itself, but their performance, seems to be a pretty big correlation here to the better performers. So then we asked about the use of a project management system. And, you know, about half were using something and about half weren't of this 174 owners. It seemed to be more strongly used in the private building owners and the healthcare owners, a little bit less in the others, but not dramatically. You know, so it seems like we're in a transition phase now where more and more people are getting to where they're not just relying on Excel spreadsheets and emailing things around and, you know, worrying about version control and those kinds of things, but they are adopting these sorts of systems which are proving beneficial to them. Now, among those who are using them, we said, well, what are you actually doing? Because again, if somebody wants to compare how they're doing it to somebody else, or if somebody wants to get into it, they want to see what it is the other folks are doing. Cost management and contract administration, that was really the top, and especially as you can see here, an above average with private building owners and with healthcare owners. And using it for construction project management, 81% said yes, we're doing that. And among those subsets of owner types, you're seeing it very strong at the private building owner, very strong at healthcare, and at average for education. The others falling a little bit lower than that. Are you doing it for capital program management? Are you running a lot of your projects together through some sort of a platform like this? 68%, a little bit less overall, but boy, is that popular with the private building owners. I mean, 80%. And with healthcare owners, even more so. 84% of them are doing this. So, you know, this has got to be a good indicator for folks to see where some value is being found there. Then are you using it for performance reporting and analysis? You know, again, very strong from the private building owners and the healthcare owners, a little bit below average here for the other three types. Construction scheduling, again, the private building owners and the healthcare owners above average, the other one's a bit below, but here now is where you see infrastructure owners coming in very strong. All right, so this one really peaked with the infrastructure owners, as did risk management, right? Above average for the infrastructure owners, and here the education owners. So it's quite interesting to see how different owner groups are deploying the functionalities of these systems in different ways. And then I get back to what I mentioned earlier on the stakeholder engagement. This is so important, and this is a pretty outstanding finding that we came up with here, which I'll share with you. That we asked, how effective do you think you are at this? And among that top performing slice, half of them said that they're either high or very high effectiveness at it, and at least 36% said that they're at least moderate, right? Only 14% said that they didn't think they were any good at it. And you can see how that now breaks out among the various types. But then when we ask the same questions to the low performers, pretty amazing, almost like the reverse. 54% of them said, we got to admit, we're really terrible at this. And so that is maybe one of the biggest and clearest findings from this whole thing, is the degree to which you can effectively collaborate with your end users, your stakeholders, the finance people, the users, the administrative people, anybody who's involved in this thing and has a stake in it. The better you can be engaged with them all the way through the process, wow, does that seem to directly correlate to better performance. So in summary here, here looking just at the infrastructure side, you can see in terms of cost performance how all these public infrastructure folks said that we get in trouble on more than half our projects. That's actually higher than average. In terms of schedule performance, it's just about average. When we looked at that infrastructure side in terms of the differences between the top performing and the infrastructure, there's always a delta there, all the way through. All right, so there's definitely room for improvement here on all of these things. And when we looked at the building side, here we're comparing the private with the public against the dark red, which is the top performing owners. And, unfortunately, it just seems to be a pretty consistent truth through here that the public building owners are struggling more than the private building owners. And so there's definitely things to be learned here. And when you look at the difference in the dark blue between how many of the private owners are doing these various things and how many of the public owners, some really strikingly big differences here. So again, this kind of lays out a plan for the kinds of things that if public building owners would get more deeply engaged in, it's got a pretty high correlation to better performance. Even down here with formal effective employee onboarding, all the way through, you're seeing a pretty big delta. So, we're hoping that this can be an inspiration and give actual quantitative reason for why people would want to get more engaged in a lot of these things, because they could expect to see a performance lift. The PMIS systems, seem like the education, public building, and infrastructure owners lagged somewhat against the private buildings and the healthcare. The infrastructure was actually really strong in scheduling. And in terms of stakeholder engagement, everybody can improve in that. If there's one takeaway that you can get from this, I think that might be the number one thing you want to work on in your organization, because boy, does that seem to correlate strongly with better performance. And I wanted to take just a minute here at the end to tell you about another one that's available at the analytics store, construction.com, that we came out with a few months ago. This just deals with where we are as an industry and how we manage risk. We had 111 owners. We had 253 general contractors and 143 trade contractors. And eBuilder was one of our sponsors on this one, along with all these industry organizations that you see. And this is about a 60-page report. This is a pretty big one. It's got case studies, it's got interviews, it's got a lot of data in it. So I'm just going to pull a little bit of it out today that I think resonates with some of the things that we're seeing, especially around better collaboration, better engagement, really working hard on trying to make teams more efficient. As when we asked folks, what is it you think are your biggest obstacles to doing a better job and implementing risk management practices more efficiently and thoroughly and comprehensively across your projects? You can see here pretty consistent with owners, GCs, and trade contractors saying there's this lack of cooperation and information flow. This is a big challenge, right? And this is, of course, what a PMIS system. This is what you can do when you're engaging more effectively with your stakeholders, right? This is how you can address these things. And a general lack of cooperation and information flow between design and construction. Again, taking advantage of PMIS system can really help you address this, but these were identified as some of the biggest issues that people are having and why they can't engage more effectively in risk management. And then we said, do you think that collaboration itself actually has a positive impact on risk? And look at how many people, the dark red and the yellow are strongly agree. I mean, it's just nearly unanimous. Everybody's saying, look, if we can actually get people more effectively collaborating with each other, sharing information, boy, is that going to bring our risk down. And so, we wanted to share this with you because we think it really fits with not only how you're organizing and running your own department, managing your talent, what your organization or construction culture's like, and how you measure performance, but also in this aspect of risk, right? There's some threads here and some themes which we think are really important for the whole industry. So with that, do we have any questions that have come in?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Steve. Before I go to the questions panel, this is pretty interesting. Like at the end here, how collaboration is key. I remember I've had like quite a few stories and owners that I've worked with, and one gentleman was telling me one time that I have so many problems in just dealing with information flow, especially in a timely manner. That oftentimes what he's facing is what should be just a $10,000 issue. Can oftentimes just escalate into hundreds of $1,000s worth of an issue just from poor collaboration and untimely information flow. So I mean, just hearing and seeing those statistics and the studies and the reports is pretty interesting. So again, for everybody, if you have any additional questions, just feel free to ask the questions in the control panel. First question, Steve, is what did owners say was the best way to get contractors and designers into a collaborative environment? Loaded question, right?
There's been an awful lot of actual study about that. And there's a number of kind of roadmaps, if you will, that people are experimenting with. The thing which we struggle with as an entire industry here is that there is no central federal government agency that's responsible for improving our construction industry. It's really up to the associations, or it's up to motivated individual practitioners to try and make our entire system operate more fluidly and take the friction out of it. But some of the most effective things that we've seen are, especially around risk, is if you will actually conduct early in a project a formal brainstorming session with all the key players to say, look, this isn't your first rodeo, electrical contractor. You've built the hospitals before. Listen, general contractor, you've built, big lab facilities before, like we're about to do. All of you guys have an amazing amount of experience. You've all gone through the drawings or the model. You know what this is supposed to be, right? I want you to come to the first kickoff meeting with the top 5 things that worry you about this job. Nobody ever does that. We all assume that everything's going to be great, and when it isn't, we all turn to our contracts and our lawyers and start blaming each other, right? So what I've seen is a very effective thing, and it came out in that risk report, and if you guys download that, you'll see this, is if you will actually have a formal brainstorming session just about risk and ask people to show up with the top 5 things that worry them about this job, that starts a conversation. And that starts a feeling as if, okay, what we're going to do here to take care of your concerns, here's where we're all going to chip in to make sure that your risks are managed. We're going to make sure your risks are managed. We're going to make sure your risks are managed, because if we can reduce all these for everybody, wow, what a great project we're all going to have together. Now people are ready to collaborate. Now people have each other's backs in a way that you can't do if you just have sort of a let's have lunch and a kumbaya and agree to be nice with each other. But you make it about something real, and you take advantage of the knowledge and experience of the individuals you have at the table, and you learn a lot about everybody else in that process, right? You truly become a team, which is hard to make happen. And then the second most effective thing we learned was you now have to have a regular meeting about how are we doing on that. You can't do it once, make a binder full of stuff, stick it on the shelf, and forget about it. You make it a regular risk management meeting where you talk about those same things. How are we doing on those things? All right, did that plan we put in place to keep that from happening? Is it being effective? Has anything else cropped up that anybody's worried about? You make it an ongoing part of the discussion, so it keeps it alive and it keeps it organic, because things change as projects move through. But you know, you make the collaboration really important for everybody because you make it in their interest. And it isn't an idea that's kind of floating in the air. It's real because you've opened yourself up. You've said, these are the 5 things I'm worried about. You've gotten everybody else to hear that, name it, and take some part of the responsibility for making sure you're going to be okay, and you're doing the same thing for everybody else. And again, you know, this is the kind of thing that people have learned from trying, and it's a practice. There's nothing wrong. There's no downside to trying this on your next project, right? Because nobody wants to have a bad project, but nobody knows how to do it any differently than we've always done it.
Okay, Steve. So like what I kind of hear from you there is first, you know, bringing key stakeholders like earlier on in the process, especially like on the construction and design side, like bring them, you know, closer up to offer their feedback and kind of collaborate together.
And some of those internal stakeholders too. You know, you're doing something for healthcare. You know, you bring in the department head because they have concerns too, right? And lets everybody hear what those stakeholder concerns are too, in a formal way, before there's problems. You know, so it's not just that design construction team, but it's that owner stakeholder side too.
Right, and that makes sense. And then having, you know, periodic or constant check-in points to make sure that scope is staying on track and that everybody's aligned, right? Okay, so that's a good one. So the next question is interesting though, because it kind of ties to this, like what some of your answers here is, you know, oftentimes contracts are set up to like sort of shed risk and separate risk clearly between different parties. And so this next question is, are alternative project delivery methods like IPD and design build good strategies to reduce risk, you know, versus design bid build, and to kind of foster more collaborative environments? Does that make sense to you?
It makes sense. And what I'll tell you candidly from what I am seeing and hearing and talking to people, some of it's anecdotal, but it isn't necessarily the project delivery method that's going to guarantee better collaboration. That I was just talking with one of the country's biggest owner, designer, developer, builder companies in the country today, and they're saying that they have as much trouble getting their own internal groups to cooperate with each other as they ever did in terms of having third parties and outsiders collaborate. You need some kind of reason for people to want to collaborate, even if they're doing design build. Still, the designers know their designers and the builders know their builders, and although they're operating under one contract, you know, there's all this history, and you need some things to tactically, tangibly kind of hit the restart button to kind of reboot all that old history that we have. And so we haven't seen yet that there's a really strong correlation between project delivery method and the reduction of the kinds of problems that can be traced back to poor collaboration. On paper, it appears as if that would be the case, but there's, you know, this stuff is maybe 10% contractual and 90% sociological. You have to need to want to do it, and you have to create that environment in which it's okay to talk about these things and have those adult conversations early on and stick with it. And so I think over time we may begin to see that as design bid build becomes less dominant and as some of these other ones take over, we may be able to start to get some data, but I'd say it's early days in that yet.
Okay. All right. So let's see. The next question really ties into, let's see. Oh, are there any tools or checklists out there that can guide you on doing a deeper analysis of your program? So like you sort of showed some of the main topics and things here, but are there any tools to sort of like use yourself to kind of do an analysis or deeper investigation of your own program?
I don't think so. What as I've been presenting this data that you all saw today to folks, and especially if you download one or two of those vertical reports, you can ask yourself these questions. And we tried to set it up that way. So in a sense, you can kind of self-test your own organization, and then you can score yourself and see how you compare against the top performers, low performers, and average. And you'll get a sense of where you are. So essentially, the way we organize this survey and this report can function kind of as an internal checklist. In terms of risk management, there are published risk management checklists. A lot of the major industry organizations, the AGC, people like that will have those. They tend to not really deal with the sociological side of the thing, or the internal, how you're running, you as an owner running your capital department. There are more tactical things on executing the project, right? And they're valuable. I would think in terms of wanting to run your own self-diagnostic about your own capital project department, that you could just use the questions that are in these reports and just ask yourself and see where you think you fall against these other folks.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point. Sometimes what we're doing when we're working with owners and clients at eBuilder, actually what we'll do in it, we'll use these reports and a lot of the things that we see here, and we kind of do interview processes with our clients to kind of actually weed out like where the biggest challenges are, like what fits to them specifically. And then I think just to add to that, as part of that process, really looking at the impacts. So when you go talk to different people in your organization, you're going to hear like, yeah, here's my problems and here's my issues, but really finding the low-hanging fruit where things are really like blowing up into those big problems, and finding out the risk for big impacts. I think that's pretty key. But that's some great guidance and feedback, Steve. That hey, these reports can be, a lot of the questions and things you see here can be used as a basis for doing a self-assessment. So that's really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, Steve, you brought up that PMIS, right? So, what does PMIS stand for again? Just for the audience, somebody asked that.
That's a project management information system. These are the tools which are either premise-based or cloud or some combination of that, in which you can have the central document storage. You can run your digital workflows through them. Running RFIs through them, running project reports through them. Managing contracts, aspects of project controls can run through them. But it's just, as opposed to the very fragmented nature of the way that things were when I was in practice, certainly. Lots of different documents, lots of spreadsheets and Word documents flying around, and now being emailed around, and it's just a way to centralize them in a central repository. Leveraging the cloud in many cases, but it's just that single source of truth, which becomes much more useful, and it has audit trails and archiving, and it's just a cleaner way to go about managing the massive amount of information that is involved in all these projects.
That sounds really awesome, and that actually I think answered my next question, which I saw here, which was any specific examples of how technology can manage risks or improve collaboration, and a lot of the stuff that you described there through like using PMIS sounds like it helps facilitate that. Mm-hmm. Any other specific example that you can think of that glares out at you where technology helps?
Well, we do a lot of work in studying building information modeling, and that's sort of a similar approach in terms of taking all the functional physical characteristics of this asset that's got to get built and making them digital, and so they can be extracted, they can be machine read. It's kind of a similar approach to all the things which are related to project controls, and all the things which are related to the project documentation and managing the process as it goes through the years of construction. On a PMIS system, it's creating a digital archive and a digital record, as opposed to relying on where did I put that thing, and did I get emailed the most recent one, where you just like in a model, you can go and get the most recent reliable piece of information out of that model. Now you can go to the PMIS system, you can get the most recent, reliable, accurate, and it's actionable. That's the thing, is this piece of information I have actionable? Because if I act on it and it's the wrong piece of information or it's outdated, we all know what kind of trouble that causes, right? And so you want to have certainty. So it brings certainty to this process, which is by its nature terribly uncertain. So the parts of it we can control, such as all the information flow and who has seen it, who hasn't seen it, can I make sure everybody's got the most current version of something? All that is just, it's almost magical in terms of the order it can bring to that aspect of the process and the certainty that it can bring to that aspect of the process. So, we've been tracking things like this for a number of years and have seen a great deal of improvement, or at least we'll say reduction of the kinds of problems that tend to get created when you are more fragmented and when you were more paper-based. Right? This is pretty clear now that this is the future of the industry and an important place to be.
All right. Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. So project controls, like, through a PMIS, as well as leveraging BIM, or building information modeling, and even being able to leverage them together, somewhat like kind of helps create or facilitate a single source of truth, making sure the latest information is out there. And when you brought up, for instance, improved stakeholder engagement, even internally, right? I've heard a lot of times that during design reviews and things like that, some of these internal stakeholders at an owner's organization, they don't, they're not necessarily experts at reading design documents or construction documents or even, manufacturer drawings, right? And so I think, I've been hearing, and from what you're saying, BIM and just even being able to easily view, models and different things together, kind of helps stakeholders verify that the scope and their requirements are being met. Would you agree with that, or?
Yeah, we're seeing that was one of the biggest early wins for design firms, especially who began to adopt. They were building information modeling. They were able to design a better building because they could do better analysis and do better simulations, and they could actually produce a better product. But right along with that was the ability to way more effectively engage not only the builders, but the client and all those client stakeholders, because they could see it, right? They can visualize it. And so the ability to visualize that information quickly on the fly, and as you mentioned, with owners, very simple browser-based viewers, you can bring them right into any kind of design proposal that you have. You can show them 3 different ways of doing something, and they're seeing it. And when they approve it, the approval sticks, which is huge for anybody on the line here who's a designer. You know how important it is that once an approval gets made, it sticks, and it's fast. And so that visualization is spectacular, and there's similar things in these PMIS systems, because you can take data and you can do reports, right? You can pull information from 2 or 3 sources, and you can make a status report, and you can roll it up to a dashboard so that an owner, especially in the folks who said that they're doing this on multiple, they're doing it program-wide, they're doing it on multiple projects, to be able to roll up something and see, where am I right now, just big picture. So I can drill down and see maybe where some of the problems are, but how am I doing today? Just roll it up to me, which is just a monstrously difficult job when you're taking all the separate documents and trying to do it. There would be lots of people doing that work, but here you just do it with the click of a button, essentially, because it's set up to do those kinds of things. So there's a lot of interesting parallels between the value that PMIS system would bring and the value that modeling brings, because you're working with information at a digital level and because you can rely on it and act upon it.
All right. So that looks like all the time that we have for questions today. Thank you again, Steve, for putting this great content together. And thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar.